Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today for this technology brown bag session. And I really just want to express my gratitude to the entire ETI team for inviting Dr. Duncan and I to speak today and share really our experience with tracking progress. How do we do this and use technology to do it well? Also want to do a quick shout out and just let everyone know that Dr. Duncan and I are actually USIS classmates. So yes, we are both Air Force Lieutenant Colonels, and that's because we graduated the exact same year. And so again, it's a pleasure to be here. Wonderful to be with classmates and to just have a few minutes today to talk about what we're doing in reflective practice. Just to recap on the objectives, and we'll get to the vision and mission. We're going to really talk about the reflective practice curriculum to ground our conversation today. I'll talk through some of the assessment challenges we've had in this course and describe the transition that we underwent moving from Sakai to the new learning management system called Canvas, and how we really tried to do this intentionally to harness technology to do an assessment well in the context of reflective practice. And then I'll hand it over to Dr. Duncan, who will be talking about how Canvas really supports our mission here to do competency-based medical education. So the vision and mission of the course are here. Really, the vision is to improve healthcare through reflection. And the mission, a little bit more tangible, is for students to develop the skill of reflection in order to improve healthcare delivery as part of their personal and professional development. And in this course, we define reflection as a metacognitive process that occurs before, during, and after situations, with the purpose of developing a greater understanding of both the self and the situation so that future encounters can be informed by previous encounters. Really learning how to think about our thinking and integrate and process our experiences to be wiser moving forward. So the goal of the course, like I said, is to help build students, help them build this metacognitive skill of reflection over time. And I love this graph because it shows that wiggly red line. And it's a healthy reminder, I think, to all of us that growth is often nonlinear. And like any other skill, reflection takes time and deliberate practice to really develop. And so it's really important that we sort of pause and reflect on how do we track progress over time to help us monitor this growth curve and use technology like Canvas to help us do this in a way that is competency-based. In reflective practice, we explore a number of different topics that you'll see listed here. Reflective practice is a longitudinal and interprofessional course. It includes students from the School of Medicine as well as the Graduate School of Nursing, which is a wonderful opportunity for our students from different schools at this university to learn with, about, and from each other in this course. We intentionally choose these topics for a couple reasons that I'll just briefly talk about. First, these topics are complex and challenging. They are also commonly encountered in healthcare. And third, they often are emotionally charged. And what this does is it helps when we have sort of an emotionally charged and complex situation, it helps human brains sort of get into the mode of reflection because it's sort of different. It's not what we're used to seeing, and it sort of challenges our thinking, right? So humans tend to just want to not think very deeply. It's our default setting. We are kind of lazy creatures by habit, but by asking our students and our faculty to really look at these challenging and complex topics, the hope is that it sort of invokes a reaction that then the student can reflect on to gain that better understanding of themselves. As you can imagine, this course really does integrate with a lot of other curricula across disciplines here at the university. So just to name a few, RP really connects with clinical reasoning, clinical skills, certainly leadership development, professionalism, professional identity formation, health system science, so thinking more broadly about the system, ethics, well-being is a big one, and then certainly communication and diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of the reflective practice sessions follow essentially the same sequence of events that you see here. So I'll walk briefly through this just again so you understand sort of the anatomy of the course so that we can really dig into how are we tracking progress over time with regard to assessment. So first, we ask the students to do an activity to get them to reflect on a topic. And usually this activity is a panel discussion where we invite people from different backgrounds and experiences, personally, professionally, to talk about the topic. The students then, after listening to that and processing that activity, then spend time in individual reflection, where they do reflective writing. And here, the students follow a very structured format in doing the reflective writing, which follows something called the RSIR framework. What that stands for, it's an acronym. Shocking, I know, in the military. This stands for R, reactions, where they identify what are their thoughts and feelings to this topic. Then S, we ask them to identify what are their sources of these reactions based on their personal context, right? Their lived experience, their values, their beliefs. Then we ask them to consider implications or impact of those reactions. And we want them to think about both positive and negative potential implications of their reactions for this topic. And the last R stands for review. And this is where we want them to summarize and really reflect on their reflection. What have they learned about themselves? Have they identified any biases? What is their plan moving forward, having done this reflective work? So as you can see in this middle phase, last step, they gather in small group and we have a collective dialogue about that topic. For the purpose of this presentation, really we're going to talk about that middle bubble on personal reflection, this reflective writing piece, because it is in this phase that the students are really assessed by faculty using this rubric. And it is through this assessment process that we're able to track students over time. There are a number of challenges that arise in this course with regard to assessment. So we'll talk a little bit about assessment challenges. First is just the nature and anatomy of the course. It's a bit complex, as you can see in this chart here. It is a longitudinal course, and it is also interprofessional. Like I said, it includes both School of Medicine and Graduate School of Nursing. So at any given point in time in this course, we really have three large cohorts of students, right? We have our GSN students, then we have our first-year medical students, and our second-year medical students. And as you can see in the green, the first-year medical students will do 3 reflective practice courses in that fall semester. Then they'll do another 3 in the spring semester, obesity, mental health, and racism. And then in the fall semester of their second year, they'll talk about sexuality, mistakes, and addiction. In the bottom, though, in the purple, you'll notice that the GSN students experience this course slightly differently. They have a more compressed timeline, more like 10 months. And as you can see, they go back and forth between the MS1 and the MS2s in small group discussions. So they'll start out with identity with the MS1s. Then their next session will be sexuality with actually the MS2s. You can see from there. And so this just creates some challenges with regard to assessment of how are we going to track progress over time and keep all these students sort of organized and straight so we can look at their growth curves sort of independently. So prior to the Canvas transition, we were in Sakai, and what students would do is they would write their written reflections, then they would upload the reflections into Sakai. Then our course administrator would basically harvest those reflections, so download all those like massive numbers of PDFs or Word documents, and then send individual emails to our faculty that were then charged with reviewing and assessing these written reflections. And as you can imagine, this was quite a lift, logistically quite challenging for our team, and there were some privacy issues there, right? What if you upload the wrong paper and send it to the wrong person? You can imagine some of the risk there. So there was an issue, though, also with lack of transparency and accountability. As the course director, I couldn't see what was happening as far as the interplay between what the student was really submitting and then what feedback the faculty were giving. So it was really hard for the faculty to all be on the same page of music to make sure we're holding students to the same sort of competency standard. As I mentioned, student privacy was an issue. Students maybe accidentally reading each other's reflections or getting emailed to the wrong person. And there really wasn't a strategy with this previous system in doing longitudinal assessment. Really, as the course director, I was more flying a bit blind, not really able to put the dots together and look at growth over time. I wasn't able to track necessarily any individual or certainly any group cohort data with regard to growth over time. So in 22-23, we did successfully transition the reflective practice course onto Canvas. And this allowed us to do a lot of things. It was really a transformative experience for me as an educator, and certainly I think for our community of faculty to go through this process. We created the Canvas course to be a primary resource not only for students, but for faculty, and to really be a central repository for course content. So it was kind of a one-stop shop for all stakeholders. We were able to create student sections. So sections is a functionality in Canvas where you can create different groups of students. And in our case, we decided to create student groups based on sort of class year. So we had one section for GSN, one section for MS1s, and one section for MS2s. And so this allowed us to send announcements to different student sections, to assign assignments to certain student sections at certain times, and really made that process a lot easier. There was also a lot of additional enhanced functionality that came with Canvas. For example, the faculty were able to go into Canvas, log in and pull up the assessment rubric. And so they could literally look at the student's paper and the rubric at the same time, which I'll demonstrate in just a second. But other functionality items were that the students were able to receive timely and transparent feedback in Canvas. And we were able to connect the assessment rubric items that we were looking at with something called outcomes, which allowed us to then more effectively track progress over time. So I'll dig into that a little bit more here. This sort of demonstrates what faculty were able to do in Canvas. You can see here that they could pull up a student reflection on the left. I took out all the details just to protect the privacy of the student. But on the right is the rubric that we ask faculty to apply when they're reading reflections. And as you can see, right, there's the RSIR that you can partially see there with reactions and source, and it does continue down. But then you'll also see that from right to left in that rubric are different skill levels, right? So either a student doesn't meet sort of the minimum standard and has a 0 for unsatisfactory, or they're beginning to reflect, they're developing and thoughtful at 2 points, capable, or some even quite skilled in the reflection at a level 4. And we looked at those levels for all of those items, the R, the S, the I, and the R. And I just want to put stomp here that really the power that comes with the outcomes function in Canvas is that you can align one of these criteria with an outcome, and that just allows you to follow things over time. This is a sort of another example of what that rubric looks like. As you can see, the RSIR going down the left in criteria and the skill level developing across the horizontal axis there. What is really fun is with the outcomes, again, we attached each of these items to an outcome. We're able then to say, okay, where do we think our students should be by the time they finish this course, by the time they finish reflective practice in the pre-clerkship period, where do we want them? And we decided, yes, right there in that red box, that we wanted them moving out of the 1s, the beginning descriptive, and moving into the 2, perhaps even pushing into the 3 level. So again, these are early students. They haven't done a ton of clinical work in general. And so we felt that setting that bar there at a 2 as sort of the bare minimum of where we wanted them to be by the end of the course was a good bar to set. And so what's interesting about this outcomes option in Canvas is you can sort of set where you think mastery is to meet your course objectives and where your students are on their educational journey. We made that deliberate decision as a team to set mastery at level 2 for reflective practice at this level. But certainly, if you're seeing a student at a later level and asking them to reflect, perhaps your bar or your mastery set point is going to be higher than that. But that's what's really interesting and fun with this process. This is an example of what a student might see as they are reviewing their own assessment in Canvas. Again, it's very transparent, right? So I, as a faculty, can go in. I can say, okay, here's where you are on that rubric. And the student sees exactly where they are on the rubric and can then self-assess and say, what do I need to work on, right? So in this case, the student is in the 2s for reactions, impact, and review, but it looks like they have room to improve when it comes to sources, like how are they connecting their reactions to their personal context? And here we can nudge them, encourage them, and support them in improving this aspect of their reflective process. From a course director standpoint in Canvas, having these assessment rubric items connected to an outcome allows me to pull up this really neat dashboard. And so quickly you can kind of take a look and get a sense of where are my students, right? Are they meeting the objective or sort of that competency level that I'm hoping to see at this level? And as you can see, many are. Some in different areas are orange and maybe are a 1, sort of near mastery, but still need to work on certain areas of the reflection. So it's a wonderful way that I, as a course director, can kind of zoom out and see where are people struggling. From an individual standpoint, it helps students self-assess and more specifically come up with goals about how they can further developing this skill. And really sort of where I get really excited with all of this is as a course director, I'm able to actually track growth over time. Certainly individuals can track their growth. When I look at larger cohort data though, I'm able to look at data such as this. So what we did is we pulled that outcome data out of Canvas and basically did a decaying average. So basically a fancy type of average that weighs more recent performance heavier than more remote performance, right? So because we expect them to grow over time. So we'd hope that they're going to get better the more recent the activity. And so in this case, in the blue, you see sort of the average reflective scores for the assessment of the reflective writing for MS1s in the fall. In the orange, you see how the MS1s look at the end of the spring semester. And then that gray is showing the MS2s. And so this is actually showing you 2 different cohorts of students. But what's fascinating is you can see that there appears to be growth over time. And that red horizontal line is sort of, again, saying where we decided to set where we felt we wanted students to try to be when they finished the course. So what's interesting to me when I looked at this data is, are the students really starting out that good? Or do we need to look at, for example, how we're assessing? Are we inflating scores? Are they really that good? But regardless of all of that, it's just really exciting as an educator to be able to have the closed loop conversation, to look at the data, and then to talk with the faculty and figure out, A, are we measuring the right thing? Is our measuring normed across the different faculty, and helping us to identify, who might be more of a hawk or a dove, as we say, when it comes to assessment, because usually we fall on one of those sides. So this is an example of School of Medicine data. In the next slide, you'll see the GSN data. So again, what's really neat in Canvas is we can have those student sections. So I can really pull out the data and say, here's what School of Medicine's doing, students, here's what GSN students are doing. As you can see, there still appears to be growth over time. But the GSN students are starting out, it appears, at a higher reflective ability than our MS1s when they're starting, which isn't that surprising. But again, as an educator, really nice to be able to see in data what we think is happening anecdotally in our sort of teaching activities. So I really hope that this time helped, and this presentation, at least my part, has helped to demonstrate how the RP team has done our best to harness technology of Canvas to track progress over time. And with that, thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Duncan to talk about competency-based medical education.
So as we are transitioning from norm-referenced grading, norm-referenced assessment to competency-based assessment, it's important for us to have a competency-based assessment framework that we are using. One of the most common ones that we see used across undergraduate medical education comes from the AAMC. They have the EPAs, or Entrustable Professional Activities. These are tasks that clinicians perform. Now, this is an example of what those EPA frameworks look like. So what we see in this framework for the task of gathering a history and physical exam are we see behavioral anchors. And these anchors follow the progression that we expect of our learners. So here on the far left in this first column, we have behaviors requiring corrective response. And as students progress, they go from early developing behaviors in the second column to late developing behaviors. And ultimately, as our learners transition to graduate medical education, we want them to have behaviors that are expected of entrustable learners. So this means we can trust them to perform those tasks. So much like we saw with reflective practice, what you are seeing here are behaviorally anchored rating scales. Reflective practice uses similar entrustment language, and it's also associated with clinical reasoning. So when we have a behaviorally anchored rating scale, and we are following that over time, this allows us to build some pretty powerful tools to help our learners and faculty and their coaches as well. Using that competency-based framework of the EPAs, this is just a snapshot of what that can look like. So these are data points collected from our pre-clerkship students from their activities that they do at our simulation center with simulated patients. And just looking at that rating scale, how we enumerate this, when students demonstrate behaviors in this first column, we assign that a value of 0, the second column a 1, a 2, and a 3. So we can follow that growth over time. What you see here is the growth curve of the class as a whole with different simulation activities over the course of about 8 months. Let's take a look at these interactive dashboards and what we were able to do with this. So we have a handful of reporting functions on our dashboards. We'll have some descriptive statistics, how Canvas is being utilized, how students are performing on their exams. A lot of this is norm referenced, so more and more we are transitioning to competency-based medical education, where, like for our integrated clinical skills course, we're gathering data points. We saw the class as a whole. We can use dashboards, and the platform that we are using to do this uses many of the reports that can be exported from Canvas, and we connect those to we're in the Google Cloud platform, so we use Looker Studio to build these dashboards. So it's cloud-based. We can set it to where students can only see their data and they can access it from anywhere. So we can take a look at single students, individual students, follow their growth over time, and students can use this to self-assess, and it can also be something that faculty use to refine curricular components, and their coaches can use this to help coach students as they are coming up with their own goals and education plans. We've done something similar for reflective practice, starting to build some of these same reports where students will be able to see their own growth longitudinally. So one of the powerful things that we can get when people like Dr. Rey are using the outcomes feature in Canvas when they're doing assessments with that competency-based assessment framework using those behaviorally anchored rating scales, you can get reports. So the Canvas admins can pull reports that will let you look at individual sections. So looking at those different cohorts, we can filter to that. We can look at individual students. This is de-identified, so these are dummy variables. We can look at where in the curriculum that occurred. We can look at individual outcomes, those different RSIR outcomes, and you can just filter to that as a demonstration. In some cases, students may attempt this multiple times, so we can look at the attempt that they had and follow that growth. So what we see now is aggregated to the class of 2026. If we want to look at an individual student, looking at just their progression with the learning outcome of sources, we can see that as well. Another feature that we have the ability to do, or another feature that Canvas has, is you can add comments within your assessments. So that is something that we are starting to do too, where we're going to be using narrative feedback. We can write scripts. Canvas has a programming interface where with a few lines of code, you can extract all the comments and then you can put those on the dashboard too. And where we hope to go with this is take that narrative feedback that students are receiving, and then we can summarize that. And we can use that to help students inform their self-directed learning, inform their own development as they are attempting to reach the milestones that have been set. So those Canvas reports can really be used as a competency-based medical education tool. Some students will interact with these dashboards, may be intuitive for many, but I would say this is most powerful when it's used as a shared mental model between learners and their coaches. So coaches support our learners. They can use the dashboards to have data-driven decisions or data-driven recommendations to provide to the learners. And learners can use these dashboards to identify their growth opportunities and can develop their own SMART goals. And as we collect more narrative feedback from our courses, capturing that from Canvas, we also capture that from our direct observations as students transition to the clerkship year. We'll ultimately be able to use generative AI to help summarize that and provide more meaningful and actionable feedback to students. So what we're talking about now is precision education. So dashboards are a tool that empower precision education. So we're able to visualize those milestones with competency-based medical education, as we saw with reflective practice and clinical skills on those dashboards. It had those milestones or those mastery levels that we expect at different points during the curriculum. So students or learners and their coaches and faculty members can visualize those milestones. They can visualize a student's progression toward their attainment. And ultimately, we can make entrustment decisions, and we'll be able to use this to inform a student's ability to progress through the curriculum. So this shared mental model allows students to self-assess, allows them to plan, facilitates effective coaching. This is also something that we can use since we have data that we're capturing from the learning management system and other sources. This allows us to do some predictive and prescriptive analytics. So predicting, identifying some of our learners at risk, and then prescribing, giving them an education prescription or using that as a coaching tool. So with competency-based medical education, combined with learning analytics, we get to precision education. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you for watching today's Teaching with Technology Brown Bag session. You can view all Teaching with Technology Brown Bags on the USU YouTube channel under the full ETI playlist. Have a nice day.